Tactile Optic Shock. I'm sure you'll agree those are three quite bold and striking words. We'll explore them in a little bit of detail shortly, but that is the title of a new creative writing project that in itself is part of a new digital project for the 2021 Visual Arts Gallery in Scunthorpe. My name's Brad Mell. I'm very pleased to be joined by Pamela Crowe, who is heading up this creative writing element. Pamela, thank you for joining me. I'd like to start, first of all, if I may, by just exploring the relationship a little bit between the creative and the digital, because on a first thought, it's not something to my mind that inherently goes together, and yet there's quite a bit of overlap, I think. So just tell me a little bit about what the relationship between the two is to you.
Well, first of all, hi, Brad, and thank you for having me on today. It's really nice to be here. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I'm a little bit like you, really. When I think about writing, I'm often thinking about books and libraries, and I'm thinking about, paper and pens and stationery. So kind of transporting it onto a digital setting is quite thrilling, really. I think, first of all, it removes the kind of geographical barriers that we can incorporate into our work. It means that we can meet and work collaboratively, which is a really, really exciting element of it, and one that we've brought into this project because we had some online workshops that we've been running in creative writing, and we've also been able to share Google Docs and work collaboratively on those as well. So it allows us to work in a much more co-creative way, allows us to meet new people, and also kind of sit around a virtual table and work together in that kind of creative workshop setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And you begin to explore there how the two can go together. But just interesting, you mentioned like the Google Docs and people being able to get involved where perhaps previously they wouldn't. Obviously, we know these days a lot of things are online now anyway through necessity. But that does bring up a point about digital access, doesn't it? Do you think a project like this allows a bit more digital access to creative writing where that might have been, a form of culture that was previously closed off to a certain group of people?
I think massively, actually, and that's a huge shift I've seen, of course, inevitably in the last couple of years. But, as a participant or as a workshop facilitator, it's really expanded my creative practice. And I think that's not just me. I see that really across the whole of the kind of creative writing, poetry, text-based art infrastructure, really, that suddenly everyone's taking stuff online and they're doing it in a really dynamic way. And that has evolved as well, inevitably, over the last 2 years. So the idea, I think, 2 years ago, that any of the kind of major, I guess, kind of organizations and institutions which are right at the center of writing and poetry, the idea was that you would go somewhere for a residential, you'd go to a course, you'd probably be going to, a physical setting to do it. There's no way I myself, was accessing stuff like that. I was just very much kind of writing at home. It was a solo space. So the digital access element for me on a personal level has hugely transformed the writing community that I exist within. And that, I think, has come as a surprise to a lot of people that are kind of have a literary background or creative writing background. I've heard many, many stories. I was working on a project yesterday with an artist, and they were talking about a writing group that came together over the course of COVID-19, and just kind of what a huge kind of support structure that is for them across a number of aspects of their lives. So it's changed hugely for the good.
You mentioned that community there, and I think a project like this can really tap into that. You've mentioned the workshops, and we've done a few of those already for this project for the Visual Arts Gallery. I think there's some coming up. Just tell me a little bit about those. What was happening in those workshops, and how did that take place?
Yeah, sure. Well, at the outset, when we were devising the project and thinking about elements of it, as well as it being obviously kind of virtual and online, we wanted to root it in place, and that was kind of one of the really key parts of the project. So the title of the project, Tactile Optic Shock, are three words that I stole, really, or borrowed from a book, a textbook that I had at university many, many years ago. And it was an academic book by a guy called Gary somebody, can't remember, writing about the poet John Donne. And he writes about John Donne, who's a poet I love, walking through the city of London, and how his poetry gives the reader this tactile optic shock, and that you get the sense of this real place that is communicated through poetry, through text. And I loved the idea that you could say something very dramatic in 3 words, and it linked therefore to the Luke Jerram's project of Earth and Sky, you know, that 2021 Visual Arts Centre had done previously. And within that, on the 2021 Visual Arts Centre website, you could go and find these text works that people in the community had written and locate them through the What 3 Words, which is this website. I think many people will be familiar with it. You can go and identify kind of a square of land, a location with What 3 Words, and they're random. And so that for me was a really exciting kind of way into the project, to think about real places, whether, you know, routes through the city or the towns or the villages we live in, or maybe it's a corner of your living room at home, to think about place and what it meant to us, but also to actually kind of add in this like wild card almost of new vocabulary that this What 3 Words could generate, and to see what fun and what kind of creativity that sparked. Because I remember saying in one of the workshops, I know as a writer myself, I have, you know, I might think that I've got a reasonably good vocabulary, but I know I tend to reuse a lot of words. You know, I can see the same word coming in my writing. And so in a way, using the What 3 Words aspect was itself kind of, for me, a tactile optic shock in terms of my own writing practice. And then within the workshops, it was, because we were doing them online, I was using some visual prompts, actually photographs from holidays I'd had, that weren't necessarily images that any of the workshop participants would have seen before, but to reinforce the idea of place, and then to, then imaginatively write around an image that you'd never seen before. And because there were real places in those images, we were also able to go onto the What 3 Words website and look up what those random 3 words were for any of those locations. So it was a bit of a kind of exercise in cooking or baking, and that we had a number of different ingredients. We had real places, we had everyone's imaginations, we had everyone's own kind of creative writing practice, and then we had the What 3 Words as well. And it was about mixing those all together and then writing, if we wanted to, on the Google Doc, the shared doc that we were using in the workshop, so that we had this trail, I suppose, this kind of shared document, and then that work's being lifted into the Twine program. So that's going to be part of the kind of the digital story that's told on there.
I think one thing that was interesting to me about the What 3 Words angle to it was that whilst they are random words, you know, connected to a place, they were the same words. So, and by that I mean, when I had a go at this, I typed in, I decided, because, you know, it's a very Scunthorpe based project, I typed in the local football ground, Sands Venue Stadium, and it came up with tuned, numbers, and sleeps. And so I thought, okay, that's interesting. I'll come back to that. I'll have a think when I, you know, could think what to write about that. And then I came back upstairs and I thought, well, let me try this on a different device and see if it's the same, or if I can maybe spin the wheel, if you like, and get 3 words that I quite liked to. But it was the same every time. And I think that could, you know, that in a way, to me, it certainly made me think, right, well, how do I relate these 3 words that, as you say, we probably wouldn't have used in that piece of writing otherwise, to a very specific, you know, physical location?
Yeah, it works really well. Yeah, I wondered that too. I did a similar test. I wanted to kind of see if it's kind of generates different ones each time, but no, it doesn't. And that, which is kind of makes sense. I guess it's great that it's a reliable thing. So once you know what those 3 words are for that specific location, that it will always be that. And I mean, just in themselves, any location you go to and look at what those 3 words are, they often just seem beautiful in themselves, those 3 words put together. And I think that, again, really taps into a really, I guess, important message that I remind myself of daily, but also want to kind of imbue into, you know, workshops I'm part of facilitating, is that there are no rules. You know, I think it concerns me that we are, you know, as people, as humans, deterred from trying things, or deterred from maybe subjects that we didn't enjoy at school. And for me, you know, I find words and text personally the most kind of plastic and elastic of art forms. And I know that's not the case for everybody, you know, that's not a universal experience, but I feel lucky to kind of not be, I guess, concerned or worried about the words I use, Whereas I can be very concerned about, if I'm trying to paint, I can get quite stressed and I'm not very good at it. Or if I'm drawing, sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. But with words, for some reason, they don't worry me. I don't worry what I do with them. And that's just a really important part of creative writing. And going back to that kind of the digital access aspect to creative writing over the last, year or two, I did a workshop with a poet, Caroline Bird, probably about 6 months ago, and she was saying the same message, which is like, do you know what, as writing, we can do what we like, we can go where we want with those words, and we can put them together in any combination. And I just think the What Three Words website is a lovely starting point, really, and a great reinforcement of that idea of what happens when you just put some stuff together and then take that as your kind of springboard into whatever world you want to go in with your writing. And crucially, and I really believe this, I've sent poems off to editors and competitions or whatever, and then had feedback that what I've written doesn't make sense. And I had to really, really kind of sit with that for a while and think, gosh, does that mean that I've not succeeded? Should a poem make sense? And I've arrived at a place, and again, Caroline Bird, the poet, reinforced this from her point of view as well, that no, poetry, creative writing, text-based art, it does not need to make sense. And I think once you embrace that, then you're kind of really liberated, and writing becomes a really exciting thing.
And do you think that is specific to poetry, in relation to visual arts? That's a form that really suits that link best? I
think poetry for me, or sometimes I'll just call it text-based art, sits firmly within the visual arts, and it has, I think, that link, that connection is understood more and more, and kind of enjoyed more and more, and explored more and more. I see a number of things over the last 12 months where poets and filmmakers, poets and visual artists are kind of working together. And they're not kind of distinct things for me personally, and I think a lot of poets or writers feel that too, because I think whether you're telling a story or trying to explain what your feelings are, or describing something, whether you're doing it with, pen and paper, whether you're doing it with paint, whether you're doing it with sound, whether you're doing it with words, we should be allowed kind of immense freedom with that. And I think essentially we are always kind of painting, if that makes sense, We're trying to communicate something, aren't we? And that kind of active communication sits at the heart of all those art forms and entirely connects them, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that really links back to the tactile optic shock, almost like a visceral experience of artwork, really. And I think I'll start to round off just by going back to that title. You mentioned John Donne there, and certainly for me, the thing when you said that came to my mind was The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot. It's inherently about place. And obviously we know that's something that's been a focus through literature for centuries, isn't it? You've got Joyce, you've got Dickens. It goes back to the Iliad, even further, most likely.
Absolutely,
What do you think it is about place that really suits this project? I mean, as opposed to almost like more universal themes, if you like, than maybe family or love. Not that place isn't universal, but I'll let you respond. Otherwise, I'll be going into my English seminar lecture talk, and I'll never stop.
I think the idea of place kind of has a really lovely duality to it. So on the one hand, it can be something really concrete and something really real. And this has really come out in the submissions we've received and the work that people have submitted. There's this sense of being grounded. There's this sense of being, feet on the ground, moving around, located, anchored somehow and defined by that space. And then there's that sense of actually, I guess, more imaginative understanding of place, and that wherever place can be almost like really what's in your head, But I suppose there is a third element to it, which is about movement and about journeys and about transit. And that third element has really come in how we have looked at curating these different artworks, the texts, submissions, the poetry together, because they're all coming from different people. And yet, side by side or linked together, you start to feel like you're going on a journey. And that's really exciting, because it's not like you might find in a poetry collection. You mentioned some very, successful ones, and they're not all written by the same person. So when you're reading a collection of, poems by Hannah Lowe or someone like that, there's a beautiful kind of link between them all. It's the same voice. With this project, we've got many different voices, and I think that gives it just a really exciting element.
Absolutely. And I think let's just finish on that project. So as I mentioned, this is one part of an overall thing. You've talked about the workshops, you've talked about just then about how people are submitting to this. How are people going to experience Tactile Optic Shock, and how are they going to experience this project as a whole?
Yeah, so it's all going to be live on the 2021 Visual Arts Centre website. So that's how people are going to access it. So these works are, for the Tactile Optic Shock project, are being programmed into Twine, which is an interactive storytelling program, rather like, kind of a choose your own adventure story. So you'll land on a page, and then you'll have some choices about where you go from there. So whilst I've mentioned we've curated the works, there's a real element of kind of exploration, and each person that visits the website and goes on the Tactile Optic Shock journey will create their own story as they're moving around it. But it's going to be really interesting to see what people's responses to the work are. So I'm excited about that.
Pamela, thank you so much for joining me. It's really interesting.
Thank you so much.
For more information on Tactile Optic Shock and the overall project, which is called Soundness, go to the 2021 Visual Arts Gallery website.